Hello, everyone. I'm Rachel Sampson, Strategic Partnerships Director here at Visual Communications. Thank you for spending your time with us here at C3 Converse, presented by Nielsen. It's been a great 6 weeks of C3. Please join us this evening for a special after party event, Halloween Taningo time. It's at 5 p.m. tonight, so we hope you can join us. And we are dropping the link in the chat now. Now I'd like to thank our generous sponsors who have supported Visual Communications, and to all of our partners who have made the 36th annual LA Asian Pacific Film Festival possible. Thank you especially to the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, Sony Pictures Entertainment, Comcast NBC Universal, California Arts Council, SAG-AFTRA Producers Industry Advancement and Cooperative Fund, the National Endowment for the Arts, HBO, and Warner Media. And if you didn't already know, VC has launched our VC50 campaign. Visual Communications is turning 50 years old. And so if you feel compelled to do so, please donate to vcmedia.org/donate to allow us to continue to support our artist programs. I am excited to welcome our next panel. I am a mother of 2 young boys under the age of 5 who I've spent the last 8 months in quarantine with 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. As you can imagine, I've enjoyed a myriad of song and dance performances, not only from Frozen, but probably from every Disney musical you can think of. I'm happy to introduce Mia Barnett, a second-generation mixed-race Japanese American, originally from Fargo, North Dakota, a freelance editor with a passion for building community. She has worked at BuzzFeed and is currently the development coordinator for Kizuna. She sits on the board for the Gay Freedom Band of Los Angeles as the director of development and enjoys playing the clarinet. It is her first year programming for the festival, and she is so excited to support the VC team in showcasing talented and visionary API filmmakers from the United States and around the world. Please welcome Mia.
Thank you so much, Rochelle. Welcome everyone to the LA Asian Film Festival. Again, my name is Mia Barnett, and I am zooming in from Tongva Land in Los Angeles. And just want to mention, if you would like to read the closed captions, we are dropping a link in the chat right now, and you can click on that and it'll bring you to a new window where you can read the audio transcript. And we want to thank our community partner organizations for your valuable work and for continuing to support Visual Communications. And we want to give a special shout out to Kizuna, whose mission is to build a future for our community through the education, empowerment, and engagement of the next generation. So now we're going to get started with our artist conversation. And I'm joined today by the co-directors of Curtain Up, Hui Tong and Kelly Ng. Hui and Kelly, thank you so much for being here.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting us.
Yes, we're so happy to have you. I was sharing with you a little bit earlier that I absolutely love this film. From the moment I watched it, I was just like, we need to invite them to our festival. I was just so impressed by these kids and the insights that they have. So I'm really excited to have this conversation today. So I wanted to first start out by asking how you got connected with PS 124 and how you found out about the drama club. Kelly, we could start with you.
Sure. This is actually a better question for Hui. So
okay.
He started on the project first, and I had joined him down the road.
Right.
So you should go for it, Hui.
Right. So both Kelly and I were students, classmates at Columbia Journalism School in summer 2018. We're doing the documentary specialization there, and that was summer 2018. That was when Crazy Rich Asians just came out, and everybody was talking about Asian representations in theater, in the entertainment industry, and there's also a lot of disputes about whether that film was a good representation of the Asian community. I was a theater enthusiast in college. I've been teaching kids doing theater. I've been an actor myself, so I was naturally curious about how did Asian artists were doing in the theater scene in New York City. So for the school, we had to do this master's thesis, a 30-minute short documentary. So I was starting, doing research and reporting on the Asian artists in theater. And that led me to find out this, National Asian Artists Project, a organization founded by Bayuk Li. And Bayuk Li was, a Broadway Asian legend who was in a chorus line throughout her career. So I got connected with her and, basically talked to her that, I was in preparation for a documentary, and I found out that they had on the website, they had a, program full of kids, full of pictures of kids doing Disney shows. I was like, wow, this might be something worth exploring. So I sent her my interest, and she very welcomed me and introduced me to the school principal at PS 124. So I visited the school, and the kids were doing Aladdin at that time. And the first time I didn't bring my camera, I was just visiting them, watching the kids, and I was so impressed by how professional and how serious they're doing the, they're 10 or 11-year-olds, but they're super, super serious in doing this. And also it was such a shock of me seeing, a group full of Asian American kids doing, American iconic shows like Frozen or Aladdin. So I guess almost right away, next week, I just told Miss Hom, the principal, that, I really wanted to came back next week with my camera, and with release forms, minor release forms, if I could start filming right away. So, and they're super nice to allow me in. And yeah, that was how the story started.
That's so great. I love that so much. And I am now remembering that, when Crazy Rich Asians came out, it was a huge conversation about representation in media, especially Asian representation in media, which I'm sure as you were living in the US, you of course saw that happening. But I'm wondering if the two of you can speak about what it was like sort of participating in that conversation and sort of learning about it as two people who didn't grow up in the US and came here sort of later in life.
Well, I guess, yeah, I mean, I think Crazy Rich Asians, we talked about this amongst ourselves too, it was actually received very differently, in the States versus in China, and maybe somewhere elsewhere in the world. And I think we both come from home countries where I guess being Asian, being ethnically Chinese doesn't really put us in a minority group, as so to speak, whereas in the US it's a little bit different. So I think that starting point is kind of different and interesting. For me, and Crazy Rich Asians, I guess a good part of it happened to be filmed in Singapore, which is where I'm from and where I am right now. There was very different conversations happening with my friends back home in Singapore and my friends in the States at that time. I think that in New York, a lot of my, I guess friends in New York, were talking a lot about representation and how this is a seminal-ish sort of piece for Asian representation in the entertainment industry, in media and acting. But then back home in Singapore, there was more discussion about whether this is a good representation of Asian or Singaporeans, living in Asia. And a lot of us are yeah, no, we don't, have weddings that are so crazy and fancy and things like that. But I guess on a personal note, I do think that it is, as in, it is a constructive, I think, all things considered, a constructive step towards sort of letting people see sort of Asians and colored actors on screen. So that's just my personal take.
Right. Just to add on to that, I think Kelly said a lot of similar things that happened in China. The people were because this film was supposed to be kind of represent kind of all Asians, right? Asians in America or Asians. So there's definitely a lot of arguments against the proper representation. And I would say this film helped me a lot in starting to understand what it means by representation in the US, for Asian American communities. Because I mean, before that, I had been in the US for 4 years for college. And as international Chinese students, we didn't really have a lot of connection with Chinese American students or like Asian American students, and there's always a discrepancy. But this film actually, although it created a lot of disputes, but it was because of these disputes I got to be more understanding about, you know, what's different but what's the same for all of us, you know, as Asian communities here. Actually, I went to a lot of panels on Crazy Rich Asians. I even published an article just talking about how this film was a problematic but also constructive film for Asian communities around the world. So yeah, but anyways, in regard to our film, I think, you know, even William talked about Crazy Rich Asians, right, in the interviews. So that actually had a lot of impact on us and how we decided to approach this story, you know, because we were, you know, as you said, we were not like born and raised in the US, but like, I guess, because partly because of this film, we got this curiosity about this community that just lived around us, you know, around our, you know, as international students, but kind of create a channel into that community. And yeah, that's really helpful.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting because I think at least in the US, it feels like we have so few like Asian films in mainstream media that you want to be excited and you want to support them, but at the same time, you do want to leave room to, you know, be critical of things. So yeah, I definitely gonna have to read your article, Hui. That sounds really interesting. And you mentioned William talking about the impact of Crazy Rich Asians. I know he's talking to his mom and saying like, oh, you, or was it the principal or someone was telling him like, oh, Asians can't be actors, but I saw Crazy Rich Asians, so like, what does that mean? And mom, you're always watching like these TV shows with Asians, so what do you mean that Asians can't be actors? And like hearing that was like, oh, of course, like that's the main takeaway from this. And I loved hearing it so much. And like coming from a 10, 11-year-old, you're like, this is so profound. And like I was just kind of taken aback that he was able to make those connections. Were the two of you surprised by the things that these kids came up with, these insights, and just like all of the different nuances that they seem to just intrinsically understand about what it's like growing up as Asian American?
Right. I guess I'll just start it because I really want to talk about when you mentioned that part when he said, "Mom, you watched all the TV shows in China, like all the Chinese actors, but why can't we Asian Americans be actors?" Right. So I was very shocked that there's this kind of sense of like transnational living style in those in the families we went into, that, you know, not only William but also Charlotte's brother mentioned that their mom always watched, you know, all these like bad Chinese dramas, and they were like comparing those Chinese actors to the Asian American actors. So I'd say like this is a very complex. So what I mean is like they're not just growing up in the U.S. and, you know, paying attention to what, you know, Asian Americans actors are doing. They also in their lives they had a lot of other influences that provide another framework for them to think about the issues, that when they see themselves, they see the Chinese actors on the screen that, you know, their parents are watching. So that would kind of give them both more motivation, right? Because as immigrant, I mean, they're Asian Americans, but like their parents are first generation immigrants, and they got the impact of those like kind of the culture from their original country, from their cultural roots, that they got motivation from, but also they have to face the challenges growing up in the US. You know, Asian Americans are still kind of like needing more representation in the US. So I was like, I couldn't imagine how that kind of like two aspects work together in their minds. But I feel like William were treating it fine, and he's able to kind of joking around between those two kind of cultural frameworks. And yeah, I think that's what we wanted to show in the film.
And I think like in terms of being articulate, very eloquent about issues like that, even as like a 10, 11-year-old, I guess initially it was a little surprising to us maybe, like when we started out, I guess, especially for William, I think like that it really features in his consciousness that he is thinking about all these things on like representation, even if he doesn't like word it that way. And, you know, there's that part about how he says, why don't we learn more about like Chinese people? You know, we're learning about Christopher Columbus and things like that. So I guess we can't say that everyone else in the theater club or in their school, the other kids are, you know, like thinking as much about issues like that. But I think like, especially for William, because I guess his sisters, especially his elder sister as well, is pretty vocal about like wanting to like support him so that he gets really like gets out there as an Asian actor. So I think there's a little bit of that influence from there. But I was also wondering whether how much of it has to do with like their theater kids. So maybe it's a lot more present in their mind, you know, like they in school, they are a group of like mostly like 99% Asian American kids in the theater club. But then when they go for like the international theater festivals, like the one in Atlanta, they see that like it's different, like the demographic makeup of the other groups are quite different. So I wonder, you know, like what that sort of like makes them think about and like reflect about. Maybe things like that have an influence as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it is so interesting to see how open they are with each other in theater club. They're just so outgoing. And then I was noticing the like dichotomy between that and like especially like Charlotte at home. She's just like more reserved and like her brother's always speaking for her and she just kind of like sits there and listens. Um, was it difficult to get these kids to open up? Because I know sometimes, you know, working with kids is a little difficult, or do you think because they were, you know, involved in theater, it was a little easier? And then I guess my second question is, did you see those differences between how they were at school and then how they were at home? And then Kelly, you also mentioned the conference that they go to. And I'll go to Hui for this one.
I guess, you know, at the first, because, you know, I first went to the school myself, and I was pretty surprised that they were super open to me, because I mean, they were an award-winning theater club, and there were a couple of TV station crews coming to their school to film. So they thought I was from some TV station, and they didn't really know what documentary was. So, but that was kind of a good thing at the beginning, because they didn't know I was, or, you know, Kelly joined me a couple of weeks later. They didn't know that we were going to follow them all around for the next, you know, 6 or 7 months. So yeah, they were doing super well. They were just rehearsing. We didn't really enter their homes until much later in the process. Kelly could talk about that. So at the beginning, it was all fine. And the kids, they thought we were just filming them doing theater. So it's not about identity, it's not about their families whatsoever. And that was some good memory for us. But then some, you know, and then we went to the theater, the Junior Theater Festival in Atlanta. You know, they were bringing Aladdin to the competition, and the parents were there. So it's also good that we were able to know their families, talk to the parents. We were actually staying at the same hotel and same rooms as their parents did. So those parts were like kind of like more smooth for us. But then I think we did face some difficulties trying to connect with them more deeply. Yeah, and
yeah, there's like a kind of like a fun, well, on hindsight, it's a fun story to share. That I guess it was, I think it was like midway or sometime in our production process where we met with like a crisis with the kids. There was a misunderstanding. Like basically, they kind of like thought that we knew too much of them, that or like that we were telling on them to the adults in school, like principal and like Mr. Olsen or something like that. And then they started to like really avoid the camera. And initially we didn't really know what was going on, so it was like kind of like scratching our heads, and we were even like, oh my gosh, have we like lost the kids, like, or like do we have to sort of like find new characters, like what's happening? And they started calling us like stalkers. It was quite funny. Yeah. So I think for like a good few, like a week or two, maybe that was what was going on. But then we reached out to some of their parents, and I guess like was trying to like clarify And then we realized that, oh, okay, there was like kind of a misunderstanding, and maybe we were partly responsible for sort of like yeah, like certain things that happened. So we then sort of like apologized to them, and then they sort of like apologized to us as well. And I remember we also met like William and his family for dinner like near school one of those days. And somehow like this crisis sort of forged stronger bonds between us and some of this main characters in our film. And yeah, I think Hui mentioned in one of the previous panels that it was actually after this incident that we started to film in their homes. So it was kind of like a turning point, in fact. Even though, you know, when it happened, we're like fretting, like what's going on. But I guess it sort of taught us that, well, at least for me, that, you know, they are not, well, they're kids, but they are also not like just kids. Like in a way, we sort of like learn to respect them as just regular people with like feelings as well, and not sort of like take for granted that, you know, it's fine because they're kids and they're going to forget about it tomorrow when we see them. But it wasn't exactly the case in this case. So yeah, that was quite a learning point.
Even in terms of documentary filmmaking, I think we learn a lot in terms of building connection with your subjects. It's like not just superficially that they're great for you to film them. It's not real connection, like it's not like deeper connection. So it does require time to really get to know them. Even it does even need some crisis, you know, for people to really connect with each other deeper. But to answer your other question, you know, whether there's difference between, you know, their rehearsals and their at homes, I'd say like William is pretty similar at home. Like William is the smallest kid at home, and he was pretty much given a very free space to express himself. His two bigger sisters, like his you know, oldest sister just graduated from college while we were filming, and she was like a very liberal person. So she actually taught William a lot about certain topics like Asian representation, or like even some politics, or like learning Chinese, blah, 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 all this stuff. So William was also quite expressive at home. But I think that's also why we wanted to include Charlotte in our film, like later on, like, you know, because we were filming a lot of kids, but Charlotte became our main subject because Charlotte was the one who kind of showed some you know, difference at home, right? Like for Charlotte, the rehearsals at school were pretty much like a kind of escape from a lot of pressures in her life, you know, whether it being studies, because like Charlotte was sent to a lot of extracurricular clubs by her mom, and you know, she has to do like 5 or 6 different clubs over the weekend. But theater club is really a place where she could kind of like talk to her friends and just be herself and kind of express more of her authentic self. So I think we could see from the film that, you know, she had some, you know, she showed different traits in different places, like from between auditorium and home. And I guess that's also why we wanted to include her as a main character, because, you know, as Elsa in Frozen, she, like Elsa was like through the show, right? Elsa had such a growth, you know, being an independent girl. And Charlotte, I think, in our film greatly fulfilled also this role, like kind of play within the play, right? You know, growing up, become more confident, kind of like being able to escape from a highly stressful home environment or school environment, you know, being able to be herself in a way.
Wow, hearing that story about how it almost all ended because the kids thought you were stalkers. It almost makes me want to see like a behind the scenes of the documentary. But I'm so glad that you were able to make up, and it sort of brought all of you closer together. And who you were talking about how you were deciding which kids to follow and who was going to be your main characters. And I love what you're saying about how, you know, Charlotte in real life, her story is kind of paralleled by the character she was playing, Elsa in Frozen Kids. Was it immediately clear which students you wanted to follow from the beginning, or were you kind of following a lot of students, and as time went on, it sort of came clear who was going to be the main characters in this?
I guess
I
like
guess,
at this. Oh, sorry. You go for it.
I guess
Oh.
I'll just very concisely, I'll just talk about William, because William was Aladdin when I first was there. Like, and when Kelly joined me, I just told her that, pay attention to this William guy. He's gonna be a star, not only in our documentary, but in the future as an actor. He said a lot of times that he wanted to be an actor. So William was pretty much a no-brain choice for us. But then for the other kids, I guess we had some decision-making process. Yeah.
Yeah, I think like we also sort of like decided on Charlotte a little bit later in the process. And along the way, I think there were a few others that we were wanting to considering following, but just like maybe decided that they didn't have like as strong a storyline at home, or that they just kind of like didn't warm up to us as much. So I think for each of the kids, it was like at a different point that I think for sure at the start we were trying to film. We didn't really know like who exactly, I guess, apart from William, that we wanted to focus on. So we were filming like quite a number of the children. But after a while, it pretty much like, they pretty much like showed themselves, like which are the ones that, might be stronger, and that their families as well that are welcoming for us to film in their homes and things like that.
Yeah, I especially loved William's family. I thought his mom was just like, I loved the relationship between the two of them. Like she always seemed so just entertained and just like tickled by his personality and like his insights. And I think something that I love to see was not only are these kids breaking stereotypes, but the parents are as well. Because I think, the whole time William's mom is saying things like, oh, you need to get, a real job before you become an actor. You need to study hard. But then William reveals at the end that his mom asked his new school, why don't you have a theater club? And I think that's just like one of the most heartwarming things at the end there. So were you surprised about the way that the parents responded to their kids in theater club? Or was it kind of expected based on what you had learned about their kids?
That's a good question. Wow, I think especially with William's mom, I think even during the process of production we didn't really know what she really wanted from her kids. Like, there's a lot of like fluctuations, ups and downs. Sometimes she's like, oh, I'm so afraid all my kids, because not only William, his two bigger sisters were also doing like arts or literature and stuff like that. So her mom would be like, oh, I'm so afraid all my kids were doing arts. What's wrong with them? But then whenever William or other kids had, because that's very interesting, because that year, all three of her kids were graduating. So the biggest sister was graduating from college, and then younger sister from middle school, and William from elementary school. And she was so proud of all of them, of whatever they're doing, whatever they're achieving. So like, yeah, that's what we were kind of sometimes confused by even. But I guess that's what being a parent is, or being a mother is, right? Like you want your kids to be having stable jobs in the future to kind of support families, but also you want your kids to be happy and pursue their dreams, and do whatever they can. So I guess there's always this kind of tension, or like pulling forces from different directions, right? If the kids were having pulling forces from their family and the society, then the parents would also be experiencing those kind of feeling of what should I do, like in between those forces. But I guess, yeah, that really impressed us. That shows what love is, I guess, especially with William and her mom.
Yeah, I think, especially for Jenny, like, I think it's hard to answer the question as to like whether it's surprising or not to us, because I feel like perhaps even within herself, like throughout this process, maybe like the needle was like shifting a little, in terms of like supporting her son's like artistic endeavors. Although like on the surface, she's always saying that he shouldn't be doing that because, I guess it doesn't really make a living, and all this conventional mindsets about how he's a guy and, he has to be supporting his family. So he needs like a more stable job and things like that. But then behind the scenes, I guess behind all these things that she's saying, she's actually really supportive and proud of precisely these things that she says he shouldn't be doing. But yeah, I felt that for me, that was also really moving. Like maybe it kind of, I don't know, maybe it kind of defeats another aspect of the like Asian stereotype where, you know, maybe parents are like quietly supportive sometimes of their children's dreams, but they don't sort of like shout about it. Yeah, it's actually more complicated than I think what we expect.
Yeah, I think the two of you did such a great job like capturing those nuances, because I think, I mean, I'm not a parent, so I have no idea, but I imagine it is so difficult. You have these sort of dreams for your kids, and maybe, you know, you're a first generation immigrant, you probably have some pretty like specific dreams for your kids. You left your life for your family. And so it was so touching to see when William's mother was like pretty much in tears watching him perform, and she's like so proud of him. So it was very heartwarming, and I loved that relationship in particular. Um, I did want to jump back to our conversation about representation in media, because I feel like most of the time the conversation is centered around film and television, which you do talk about in this film. But then, you know, this is specifically about a theater club. And so, Hui, I know you said that you are an actor and also have been involved in theater for a long time. Is this is the conversation around representation in theater, is it the same conversation as like film and television, or what do you see as the similarities and differences there?
Right. I think, you know, as far as I've seen in New York City, there's definitely, I think there's more complexity in theater scene, because I mean, even if theater scene is a much smaller one than, you know, mass entertainment at film or Hollywood, but like people are trying different ways to kind of get seen, right? For example, like just as the theater club, there's another company that put on all the classic Western shows played by like all Asian cast. That's like one way, right? That's like, you know, through your work, through like a familiar work to the mainstream audience, we could be seeing ourselves. But there are also some other people who are angry about this kind of approach because they want to produce like Asian themed shows, right? They don't want to be like, oh, you know, we have to use Western shows to get attention, right? So a lot of them are putting on kind of Asian themed shows, but in terms of Asian themed shows, if they want to kind of like get access to the mainstream audience, sometimes they do have to kind of have certain themes that are kind of more more familiar to the mainstream audience, but that would also cause some stereotypes. Like that sometimes they have to present some stereotypes in order to get the audience to see. Like for example, there's always this like, I mean, I have talked to my friends, there's always this theme about like, say, like LGBT community and their parents are super like oppressive and super against like freedom of, you know, of your sexual orientation. And there are a lot of work by like Asian theater groups in the US presenting those work. I'm not saying those work is bad, but like it seems like, you know, kind of like you have to present certain stereotypes about Asian families to get people to see you. But also some people who are kind of like more authentic to themselves will find hard times trying to get seen by the mainstream audience, because the mainstream audience is not that familiar with, you know, what real or what authentic like Asian culture is. So I guess, yeah, there's a lot of complexity within the theater communities. And I guess because theater is, compared to film, is, I would say it's a more nuanced form of art. Like every kind of like single dialogue has, you know, its own expression of, you know, has a lot of information behind that. That would be, it would maybe take longer time for people to really figure out a way, you know, to better represent, you know, Asian communities in theater. And also in terms of, I mean, the pandemic really, you know, closed the whole theater industry, right? So let's see what's going to happen. But yeah, there's at least people are trying. Right? A lot of different people are trying different approaches to this. So I'm still very hopeful for a better future. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think you know, it brings up that conversation of like who is this art for? Is it for you know, a mainstream audience, which as you mentioned, sort of there's certain things you have to do to reach that mainstream audience and get that support, or is it for like an Asian audience, an Asian American audience who may be able to connect with those like complexities and nuances a little bit better. But then, of course, you do want that mainstream support because you know it equals funding, it equals future projects, all of that. So yeah, it is really complicated, and I think watching this film made me so hopeful for the future because these kids are just yeah, they don't. I think they understand what the challenge is in front of them, especially if they're planning to go into the arts. But I think that like the future generations, like I have hope for them that they're going to be the ones to sort of change it all for us. So, yeah, made me really hopeful watching it. I wanted to ask, Kelly, I'll go to you first. What did the students think of the film when they saw it? And then I guess I also want to know like what did the parents think? What did the theater club directors think? What did the principal think? Yeah, what was the reception like?
Yeah. So I think they were amongst the first people to see it. When we finished the film, we had kind of like an exclusive screening in their school, where the kids came, their families, and also like alumni from the theater club. I think it was pretty well received. Although, if we speak to some of the individual kids, like Charlotte, I think she had mentioned that, well, like on hindsight, there were a lot of things that she said that she felt was really silly, but maybe that's what like a fifth grader says. And but I think on the whole, yeah, I think it was pretty well received. And I guess some people were pretty moved as well. Like, I mean, like saw tears. I think it was pretty close to them. Like, it's a lot closer to them than maybe like just like a member of the public kind of like audience. So like even the parents, I think there were a couple of like the parents, not of the main characters, but yeah, I remember like some of them like were tearing at the end of the show. And we held several screenings also in New York Chinatown, and I think and like they still came, so I guess like they were like supportive. They are supportive of it. Yeah. And Miss Hom, before our festival run, was always asking us like on email, oh, when are you guys like screening at festivals? Be sure to let me know. And yeah, like Miss Hom, Bayok, and like the rest have been also sharing the word out that it's screening at these various festivals. So also being very encouraging and supportive in that way.
That's so great to hear. And Hui, I guess I'll go to you and ask, what has the audience reception been like so far? People who've seen the film at festivals and screenings, what's that been like?
Right. I think there are definitely different groups of or different identities of people who watch this, and they share different views. One is, I guess, a lot of parents. A couple of parents talk to me, about how, because they see their kids, doing theater or doing arts, and definitely this film would help them a little bit, like build their confidence in their kids doing arts, right? Like seeing other kids doing that so well and so happily, right? They felt like, oh, maybe they should be more supportive of their kids pursuing their dreams. A lot of I think we had a screening of our short version at Columbia as our the thesis project, and I think for like white audience, for like mainstream audience, they were also very kind of like interested in how this like the influence from like their cultural roots, like Chinese roots or Chinese traditions, played into their lives. For example, like there's a scene when William went back to the military camp in China, like Jenny sent him back to China, and people are naturally very curious about that part because that is like an unfamiliar thing in the US, right? That's such a contrast that people like because I grew up in China, I knew that that's such a common thing. Like normal, every kid, we went into military training, like in, I guess, once in elementary school, once in middle school, kind of to learn discipline and like kind of to learn how to better behave, in a group and stuff like that. That there's nothing negative or positive about it, but it's part of experience, right? But it's very interesting to see that Jenny sent William back to China in order to experience that being a Chinese kid, what being a Chinese kid is like. So people are definitely very interested in that part of the film, right? And there's even some biases, because they're unfamiliar with it, they might thought it's very negative. They might thought it's like traumatizing William too much, or blah 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 blah. But I guess that's what we wanted to show in our film, that there's definitely this different ways of being, like growing up in different cultures or different countries, and those kids are actually experiencing that transnational aspect, as immigrants' children. So yeah, that those are, I mean, whether it's like positive or negative feedback, it's all like very helpful for us to think about why we made this film, but also why we want to present this film to the audiences. So yeah, I guess that's very helpful. Also, my friend circle, because we are like international Chinese students, so we also see things kind of differently. Like from my point of view that we are kind of living in between those two different cultures, and as outsiders, as kind of observers. So there are also some different opinions regarding that. But yeah, I guess I'm surprised that different people can take away different things from our film.
Yeah, that's really interesting to hear that as you mentioned, like white audiences or mainstream audiences, like that's the thing that they kind of bring up. Because I guess that wasn't the main takeaway for me, but it is interesting what different people will take away from the film. Well, we're almost coming to the end of our time here. And so I want to ask Kelly, I'll go to you first as a final question. I loved this film, and I think the two of you have such a gift for storytelling, and I want to know what's next for you.
So I guess, well, maybe we can start off with what's next for this film. We're still presenting at a few festivals. It's like Vancouver Asian Film Festival, and Philadelphia is coming up. And we are in the process of working out a broadcast offer. So that's pretty exciting for us. Really grateful that we are able to find a home for the film. And yeah, for me personally, I'm back in Singapore. And I'm working right now as a journalist in Singapore, and also working on the side on my next film. It's quite a personal film because we are actually filming with a team of friends, a friend of a friend who is struggling with early onset dementia, and we don't really know, like how long more he has. So yeah, because it's pretty severe right now. So yeah, just following that.
Yeah, I think just right to add on to our film, I think we were still, seeking, we're discussing our broadcast rights, but we're still seeking distributors and sales for other rights. So that's what we've been busy doing these days, and we're definitely welcoming other offers. So for me personally, in the past few months, because of lockdown, I had some plan for my next documentary. I called the subjects already, but then the pandemic came and all lockdown. So I had to stay at home. I started writing. I just finished up a book actually on the issue of identity, because I've always been interested in this in the past 3 months. So it's a history and cultural analysis book on 4 different types of identities. One, Asian American, Chinese American, mainland Chinese, and overseas Chinese students. I think partly because of the crazy ratios made me think about how can I bridge those 2 different aspects, perspectives. One being in America, like there's the Asian American, there's the Chinese American, but one being like in China, like there's the mainland Chinese, there's the overseas Chinese students. I think we thought we were similar, but we actually have very different point of views towards a lot of things. So I do want to use this book to kind of bridge these 2 perspectives, kind of like how people of similar origins can communicate better with each other. But it's also very, it's history. So like talking about how those identities were formed historically. I'm back in China. This is my first day in China. I just flew from LA, yesterday. So I have some ideas to film and to write about in China. So yeah, I'm pretty excited for my new journey.
Well, that's so exciting. I'm very much looking forward to the next projects for you, Kelly and Hui. And thank you so much for joining me today and joining us at LAAPFF. And for everyone out there, don't forget this film is viewable now. And if you haven't watched it yet, go watch it. The viewing window closes this Saturday night. And if you enjoyed this conversation and the festival lineup, please consider donating to Visual Communications. Your support will help sustain year-round operations and programming. Go to vcmedia.org for more info. And please stick around for the next conversation. Actress Tamlin Tomita will sit down with journalist and filmmaker Richard Louis. And then finally, for the most recent updates on the festival, please visit festival.vcmedia.org or follow us on our social media accounts at VC Film Festival. And don't forget to tag hashtag LAAPFF 2020. Thank you so much, Kelly and Hui, and thank you so much to everyone who attended.
Yeah, thanks so
Thank
much for having
you.
us.